you're watching the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar. Now, India Inc. is usually the last to speak out and in the softest of tones possible. So when the top boss of the Tata Group, $110 billion conglomerate, says the powers that be need to move away from micromanagement, that rules that govern business should not stem from suspicion, it's time to sit up and listen. N Chandra, chairman of Tata Sons, was speaking last week at a lecture where he made these comments. But before him, Rajiv Bajaj of Bajaj Auto has talked about how overregulation has killed his sector. His father, Rahul Bajaj, made waves a few weeks ago when he spoke about the environment of fear. In fact, speaking at the same event as Mr. Chandrasekaran, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman even responded, saying the government wanted to reduce the trust deficit with business. But why is it there in the first place and so palpable with a government that has claimed improving ease of doing business is its priority in the real one, not just in rankings? To speak more on this, I am joined today by Govt, author and former CEO of P&G India, Prabal Basu Roy, Management Advisor and former Corporate Director, and Gautam Chikkarmane, Vice President of ORF. Welcome to the show to all of you. Let me begin by getting Prabal's take on what N Chandrasekaran said, and not just him. We're not talking about just his comments, but this whole environment of unease, of over-regulation, of feeling under the scanner that big businesses are talking about. Where is it coming from, Prabal?
Well, there could be many reasons where it's coming from. I think we should try and sort of make sense and contextualize this in one of the most sort of fundamental shifts which are happening in corporate India, if you ask me. And and all you have to do is just look at the last week. The problem is that of late, businesses in India, things are getting harder. I mean, that's a fact. On one hand, the definition of what is legal and what is not, and what is the right way to do business is becoming open to interpretation. On the other hand, there are regulations which are stifling new businesses. So these are the two things which are really actually going on. Look at the AGR ruling, for example. It's gone through India's labyrinthine judicial system from 2003. It's been 16 years. And at the end of it, you have a 1 lakh crore fees which has been dumped on 3 telcos and 3 lakh crore on PSUs who have no telecom activity whatsoever, like GAIL and Power Grid and all of that. And that is 20 to 30 years of their combined profitability. So this is the sort of policy come judicial interpretation, which has been going on for 16 years, in which people have invested billions of dollars.
Okay. So it's going on from 16 years. It's going on from 16 years. That's why I'm trying to understand what's happening right now. A lot of these are perhaps legacy issues.
Yeah. So the point, it's not a legacy issue, Tamanna. The point I'm making is, if our policies are not clear and the legal system takes 16 years to define it, then how do businesses invest? That is the larger problem. You look at the payments industry. It's been one of the hallmarks of our digital success, right? Paytm, Razorpay, BillDesk, the works. We have now come up with a zero MDR policy, which came again last week itself. Now, this is going to completely choke the industry. So these are the sort of things which are happening, which is quite dangerous, and something which has not been talked about is the 2 secondary exits by Swiggy and Baiju's original investors. Zuckerberg, Northwest, Secure, they have exited actually.
Okay, let's go one by one. Yeah. And not like go all over the place. Just a couple of questions that I think those who are watching this evening will try and understand. Gurcharan Das, let me play devil's advocate. Because the opposition right now says this is a suit boot ki sarkar. So an ordinary person, listening to this would be saying that, hey, didn't this entire sector just get a huge corporate tax cut down to 20%? Wasn't the IBC brought in by this government to help the process when companies went bankrupt? Wasn't GST a long-standing demand of the corporate sector? it is big business who is wooed. The small guys are crying even more. So is there really a lot to complain? And is there something between the lines that we're not reading?
No, I think there's not anything between the lines. It's very much in the lines. And the problem really is a major trust deficit. And certainly things have been done to help improve it. Certainly the corporate tax reduction did improve the sentiment. But, let's go back and look at not just last week. Last week, of course, there was another example, which was how the arrogance with which Piyush Goyal referred to Amazon and its plan to create 1 million jobs and spent $1 billion. And it was I thought I thought that was deplorable. But if you go back a few more months, you'll see that we had criminalized CSR. We had criminalized so many things which were not earlier criminal offenses. That's why, a lot of Indian business people are leaving India. And the reality is that still that old attitude, the old attitudes which come from the colonial times, but also during the license Raj, the socialist license Raj, these attitudes are persisting. Despite the government, we were all very excited when Mr. Modi said minimum government, maximum governance.
Yes.
And so, but you had tax terrorism, you had the angel tax, you had the top buyer in the world come to India, made to wait for 1.5 hours outside an office of an additional secretary, and after that appointment was all fixed a month earlier. And how different is how China behaves towards business than we behave. So all these things come together and they create, I'm sorry to say, but we are all very happy that India's ranking has gone up in the ease of doing business. And there is definite progress there. But attitudes of the bureaucracy particularly, they are behind part of the problem, and the excessive reliance on bureaucratic discretion is part of the problem.
Okay, Gautam, I want to get your views in on what we're saying. The bureaucracy always ends up being the one to blame, because it's a faceless term, right? You think about some babu sitting somewhere putting spanner in the works. But how much should we question the government of the day, where the hope was that all of these obstacles would ease out to some extent?
So I agree, the bureaucracy is a problem, but it is not that the government is not the problem. Over the last 70 years, I've been studying economic history. I brought out a book, and so I came to know a little bit about how business functions. So I'm going to give you an extremely micro view of the macro problems. We have discussed enough about the macro issues. Do you know how many acts of parliament are there that govern business? 1,074. Do you know how many compliances a business has to make in a year? 58,726. Do you know how many filings a year a business has to make? 3,069. Do you know how many changes in compliances happen every year? 2,500. Just in the last quarter alone, 791 changes happened in the compliance. Now you tell me, which person in his sane mind, with a sane mind, is going to set up a business to do business in this country? Forget the tax rates, forget everything else. If there is a company, a mid-sized manufacturing company, it has over 5,000 compliances if it is functioning across 6 states. which is, it has about 100 licenses and regulations that it needs to have, registrations that it needs to have. Every day, it needs to make 2 filings. Each filing could be anything between 10 to 25, maybe 50 entries, which keep changing, by the way. Now, is this the business environment you want to give to our businesses? So yeah, I think all this complex mesh of laws in the first place, Factories Act, Minimum Wages Act, there are more than 2,000 minimum wages, by the way. Minimum Wages Act, Factories Act, Industrial Disputes Act are one part of the story which has been enacted by Parliament. Below those acts are rules of business. Those rules are written by bureaucrats. I have a sense that these are 19th century laws, 20th century rules, which are enabling all the trust deficit, the corruption, etc., to go on incessantly. I think it's time to change all this. We need to work on this, and I think there is a wonderful company, Aventis RegTech, that has brought out all these numbers. We will be now working with them, going industry by industry, sector by sector.
Can I say something, Gautam?
Look at a simple thing like GST.
Yeah, no.
You know, every time, can I just conclude?
Yes.
Can I just conclude?
Yes.
Just give me 10 seconds, 10 seconds.
Yes.
Every time the government says we are going to make the GST form simpler, voices on the ground say, oh God, we are done for. It means more complexity. I think we need to stop this kind of drafting of rules, laws, and regulation and go back to rewriting the laws. We don't have to change the laws. We have to rewrite the laws that enable doing business, that enable, that catalyze manufacturing for a 21st century India.
Right.
That's what I feel.
No, very, very good points there, Gautam. Just one thing, I feel like I'm transported back to 2013. You know, I'm getting a sense of deja vu because the same conversation was going on about our archaic laws and our bureaucracy, which, you know, sees it fit to implement it in a certain way. All of that was supposed to change. On the face of it,
I feel we are back in the 1960s.
Well, that's true.
I feel we are back in the 1960s.
That's true.
1970s.
The story
that was the time when these laws, lawmaking, this approach to lawmaking, this approach to rule making began in the 1960s and 70s. To hate the entrepreneur, to clam him down, to tie him down so that he cannot function, to tell him what to do, how to do, the smallest of infractions and a criminal liability. These are those laws. We have to end all these laws. Nirmala Sitharaman is right. If she wants to simplify laws, the fact that she is planning to do so is a very good thing. But it's not just simplification. It is rethinking, reimagining, and then rewriting these laws. That is the need of the hour.
Let's get some more voices in, Prabal. You know, my point being that at least the stated claim to change things exists. Where is it getting stuck, in your view? Is it also because on the one hand, there is a lot of stress on revenue for this government? So there is a revenue deficit, revenues are going down. So on the one hand, you are telling your tax authorities that you better shore up the numbers. And some of the stress is coming from there as well?
Yes, it could be. You know, actually post demonetization, if you see the last few years, the enforcement agencies, and especially the tax officials, have got unprecedented powers, you know, which probably existed, but they have been utilized. So on one hand, they are being targeted, and I have sort of talked about this before when the budget came out itself, that the revenue expectations were unrealistic. But the tax officials are obviously given targets, and they are not being met. So they are going all over the place, and effectively, what is being said is, this is what I'm going to assess you on. And you can take it to appeals, and it goes through the entire process of appeals in courts and high courts and Supreme Courts. It will take 10 years and before you get your judgment. So that is what is happening actually. And so this is very sad. So there's a gap between political intent and the way it is being executed. There is no doubt about that. It's not a comprehensive blueprint which is working actually at the political level as well. Yeah.
Okay, Gurchandras, let's talk about what can be done. It's great to hear, you know, let's bridge the trust deficit. But what Gautam also spoke about very eloquently was the mindset that businesses must be sort of strapped in. what N Chandrasekaran is saying, don't start everything with a view of suspicion. Has it also come because of legacy of crony capitalism and the fear over there? We also must contextualize what we're seeing today.
No, I think, every country which is a market economy has got always, there's the fear of crony capitalism. But there's a difference between being pro-market and pro-business. Pro-market means that you support competition, that you and competition, actually helps everybody. It improves the quality of products. It lowers the prices of products. So that it does a lot of good. Unfortunately, our reformers have not sold the reform. They have just, Margaret Thatcher used to say, I spend 20% of the time reforming and 80% of the time selling the reforms. Anyway, what will change things is that slogan, to return to that slogan that Mr. Modi gave in his first election campaign, which was minimum government, maximum governance. And Gautam is absolutely right. You have to rewrite the laws. The trouble, though, is that the attitudes that are responsible for those laws, I said the colonial attitudes, which distrusted Indians. Second, the license Raj socialist attitude. On top of that, we have the caste attitudes. The Brahmins and the Kshatriyas think that the Banyas are crooks. And so you have a triple whammy that is going on. So, that's why you see the school. I have a friend who started a school. If you want to start a school and you are an honest person and you need 70 pieces of paper to start that school, and each paper comes with a bribe.
Yeah.
That you would not want to start a school if you in those circumstances.
Okay, I have to.
The terrible license Raj that exists in the education bureaucracy.
Right, I have exactly a couple of minutes left on this discussion, Gautam, and I want you to quickly talk about one thing, which is the overregulation. Two sectors I'm going to point out: real estate and auto, where much required rules were brought in, but in such quick succession that they almost gave a death blow to these two sectors. Is that also a concern we must talk about? Too much too soon, that Indian industry frankly doesn't seem to be able to take?
I think if you're talking about the RERA, Real Estate Regulation Act, that was a necessity because all other regulations on real estate are municipal regulations, government to government regulations, financial, environmental, safety, and so on. But the sole missing point in all these compliances was the consumer. I think the RERA Act has brought the consumer into the forefront, if not at the center. However, the Act, because it is executed at the state level, gets a different face in every state. I believe Maharashtra is doing pretty well with RERA, and other states are not. So I think a regulatory mechanism that was wherein the consumer was brought into the regulatory framework, consumer protections rights were given, and the barriers raised so that you cannot run away with the investors' money or a household's money were required. Now, but the other regulation, I think you could go easy, because once I was having a chat with one of the top real estate promoters, and he says, we are already regulated, we already have whatever 50, 60 regulations. You can always add one or two more. It doesn't make any sense. It's not a big deal. No, I thought RERA would change that. But along with RERA, I think you need to, and it's not just real estate. You can look at auto, you can
real
look
estate
at
is one
chemicals,
example.
you can look at anything. Just let's start walking backwards.
Let's start walking backwards. Let's listen to what industry is saying, and the promises to have a dialogue. Let's see how it can actually be implemented. One political slogan of Soot Boot Ki Sarkar, in a sense, has changed the direction of legislation to such an extent. Maybe that's what we're seeing as an impact today. I want to thank all of you for joining us on the first debate this evening.